Hey everyone, hope you're doing well. Hope your writing is going well. Today I want to talk about point of view. And I'm fully aware that if you're participating in NaNoWriMo this year, you have probably already determined what your POV is for your book. But I have heard of authors who have gone back, and this sounds not fun, but it's true. I've heard of authors who have had to go back to the beginning of their books, like when they're halfway through or even finished with their books, and they've actually changed the POV because something wasn't working. So we know that it is a big enough deal that, you know, it can affect the revision process significantly, and it can affect how readers connect to your characters. So yeah, I have decided that I'm gonna split this video into two parts. Maybe you've written your first novel in first person and you wanna take a stab at third person in your second novel. Either way, I hope that these two videos are helpful to you. And yeah, I will have timestamps down below so you can jump ahead. This video is going to be about identifying different points of view. And in my second video, I'm going to talk about different issues with POVs. So yeah, let's just jump right in. So given that POV can be important to the structure or theme of your novel, it's really important to stop and consider why you're choosing a certain point of view, but also whether or not you're using it to its full potential. First, we have first person, and this is used by any character or characters who call themselves I. The first person viewpoint is considered to be the most intimate POV. It's probably the easiest way to dive right into a character's feelings, thoughts, emotional state. It's almost as if readers are invited into a personal letter or diary about the main character. It has that sort of intimate feel. And so it's usually your best bet if you want a direct emotional experience for your readers. First person can also solidify voice, so syntax, idioms, habits of mind. One of the limitations of this viewpoint is that readers see everything from the perspective of the narrator, and so action and dialogue are all kind of veiled from this perspective. I was actually thinking about this recently. I'm reading Peace Like a River right now, which I haven't really talked about on my YouTube channel because I'm not really talking books these days, but I will get back to that in December, maybe even sooner. But anyway, I'm reading this book with Katie from Life Between Words, and we were talking about how great the narration is. And there's even a part where, even though he's not an unreliable narrator necessarily, his viewpoint is limited. And so when I don't want to give anything away here, so I'm going to be really vague with this example, but he's trying to eavesdrop on a conversation, the main character, and the doors are too heavy and they kind of slam shut, and he doesn't know what these other two characters are talking about. And so as readers, we don't know that either. Sometimes that can make for a more interesting story, but again, it is a limitation. And also, speaking of unreliable narrators, there is this layer of, you know, everything's colored by this one person's perspective. It sort of reminds me of those old school projectors where you had like a transparent sheet, and then you would put another sheet over it with edits or notes or different revised content. And so when you looked at it, you would see it through the lens of this other perspective. It's kind of like that overlay changes the context a little bit. So depending on the narrator, this can either be really enriching or claustrophobic. So we'll probably talk about this in the issues with first person POV video. Authors also like to deepen that perspective by giving several different characters those first person chapters. And so that's another thing that we see a lot in fiction. When done well, this can really heighten conflict and kind of provide some texture and deeper characterization. These people become complex when their different POVs kind of compete and collide a little bit. And so that's another way that authors can make that a little bit more interesting, just as they can sometimes use unreliable narrators, which I already kind of mentioned. Mystery writers like to use unreliable narrators a lot, and I'm a sucker for a good unreliable narrator. There's also the peripheral first person, which is pretty rare, but interesting if done well. This is used to describe events and characters as told by someone who other than the main protagonist. Kind of like The Great Gatsby or the classic Sherlock Holmes stories where, you know, Sherlock is the detective, but Watson is the one narrating. Next, we have third person. And my thoughts on the third person viewpoint can really be summed up in self-editing for writers. So definitely check that out if you want to learn more about third person. Instead of focusing on every way you can use third person and the different variations, I think it's helpful to take a look at how third person can help you go back and forth between narrative intimacy and narrative distance. Word choice and syntax create intimacy, so you have to use words that help us connect to the characters, that feel and sound like the characters, so that we as readers can have that emotional connection. There are usually two techniques here, a single vision or close third, or multiple vision or shifting third. In single vision, the reader is just inside one person's mind throughout the entire manuscript. In the second, readers are passed around from different POVs, from person to person, sometimes in different chapters, sometimes in the same chapter. As with first person stories, sticking with the main protagonist's POV the whole time creates intimacy, while moving from character to character builds tension and complexity. One advantage of third person to first person is that authors can really kind of stretch their legs. They can take up more space. They can tell and show readers in a way that's not quite a third person viewpoint, but also not quite omniscient viewpoint. You have more room for description and scene setting, and readers can kind of gain information without a clear attribution. Next, we have omniscient point of view, and omniscient point of view is very rare these days. You can find it a lot in 19th century literature, especially when authors almost stop the story or stop the action to insert their thoughts or insert, what's happening in the story. Sometimes they even address the reader. Omniscient point of view is a point of view in which the narrator can kind of understand the thoughts and feelings of every character, almost as if they're floating above them, like a godlike kind of narrator. And usually this technique demonstrates that only the narrator knows this kind of information. I will say, and most writing manuals and editors will agree, that this point of view is really, really, really difficult to do well. And it's difficult for readers to be fully immersed in the story. Omniscient POV distances readers from characters, usually. There are plenty of books out there that do it really well. The Night Circus is one of those books, and I love that book by, I think it's Erin Morgenstern. So it just goes to show you that there's always an exception to the rule, but I would say if you're a first-time author, I wouldn't start out with omniscient point of view. It's very difficult to do. There are two other POVs that are rarely ever used in longer fiction, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about them, but one is second person, when the author uses you, and then there's also plural first, when the author uses we. Apparently the Virgin Suicides, I've never read it, but apparently the Virgin Suicides is written in the plural first with that we voice. But yeah, they're just rare to come across in fiction. So those are the different viewpoints that I wanted to talk about in this video, just to kind of lay a foundation and identify them. In my next video, I'm going to talk about the different issues that can come up within these viewpoints. So definitely stick around if you're interested in that. And yeah, I think that's all I've got for you. I will talk to you tomorrow. Bye.